The 16th century. Truly an eventful period for Japan. The 1500s saw the death of a more than 200-year-old shogunate, the rise of one of history's most fearsome warlords, constant bloodshed, and the arrival of Westerners on Japanese soil who were mainly interested in two things: trading and introducing their religions to the Japanese population. But even more than that, the arrival of the Westerners in Japan brought with it a clash of cultures rarely seen in history, and a good amount of stories worth telling. One such story that had always captured not only my own interest and imagination, but also that of countless historians and other curious people, is the fascinating story of a man who made his way from the African continent all the way to Japan, where he might have achieved something that no other Westerner in Japan had achieved before him: becoming a samurai. Today, we take a look at the life story of Yasuke, a story that is just as intriguing as it is shrouded in mystery and speculation. We'll explore how a man from Africa in the 16th century made it to Japan in the first place, why he made it there, who he met along the way, and how he became part of what might be the most unlikely friendship in history. If you end up enjoying the video, then make sure to do the usual YouTube stuff. Hit the like button, subscribe if you want more Japanese history and crime content, and check out my Patreon if you want to support me, starting at only $1 per month. But for now, let's get on with the show. This is the story of Yasuke, the mysterious samurai from Africa. So to get started with the story of Yasuke, we'll have to find out where exactly he may have come from. Well, he came from Africa. You knew that even before you decided to click on this video. But Africa is big. Huge even. So where in Africa did Yasuke come from? Already, we've encountered the first mystery of Yasuke's life story. Many different theories regarding his exact birthplace have been thrown around. Ethiopia, Nigeria, Sudan. But the most likely candidate, and the country that most historians have agreed upon as Yasuke's home, is Mozambique, or Portuguese East Africa, as it was called back in the 16th century. As for his birth date, a Japanese chronicle composed during the late 1500s mentions Yasuke as having been born somewhere between 1554 and 1556. Around that same time, Japan was stuck in a constant state of unrest and civil war, but also started doing business with the West for the first time in its history. The Japanese were quite familiar with both China and Korea for a long time at that point. But when the Portuguese landed in Japan for the first time in 1543, they not only established the first contacts between Japan and the West, they also brought with them wares and ideologies that the Japanese had never even heard of. You know, like guns and religion. This trade between Portugal and Japan would last for almost 100 years, until the Tokugawa shogunate pretty much shut Japan off from the rest of the world, severely limiting both trade and contact with the outside world. During this 100-year period, countless foreigners made their way to the land of the rising sun, among them missionaries who attempted to spread both Christian and Catholic religions in Japan. Alessandro Valignano, a Jesuit priest born in Naples, Italy, arrived in Japan for the first time in 1579 with the intention to check on the ongoing Jesuit missions taking place there. Valignano brought with him a whole team of assistants and of course a ship crew to assist him, and one such assistant was none other than the main character of our story, Yasuke. How exactly Yasuke ended up with Valignano is yet another point of contention. Most historians think that Yasuke was a slave in his home country of Mozambique and was somehow stolen from his owner before being taken to India, where he was then acquired by Valignano, joining the missionaries' team. A plausible theory, but no matter how exactly Yasuke ended up on Valignano's ship, he was well on his way to Japan shortly after, and records show that he definitely arrived alongside Valignano in 1579. Most importantly, Yasuke actually made it off the ship too. Many Portuguese ships that landed in Japan had slaves of African descent aboard them, but they were never allowed to actually leave the ship and interact with the Japanese. Yasuke was different. While he was allegedly bought by Valignano as a slave, he wasn't exactly treated like one, at least according to the little information that we do have. It is generally thought that Valignano treated Yasuke with a good amount of respect, bringing him along on his travels across the country and giving him a chance to educate himself along the way. Valignano was also said to be the only foreign missionary in Japan at the time who demanded his whole crew to both learn the Japanese language and adapt to the country's unique culture. Also, he was allegedly ridiculed by other foreigners in Japan for doing so. Valeriano's mission would take around 2 years in total, starting with his arrival in Japan, probably the port of Nagasaki, in 1579. By 1581, him and Yasuke had made it all the way to Kyoto, then capital of Japan, taking them through many different places across the country. Safe to say, Yasuke caught the attention of pretty much every Japanese citizen that he came across. The Japanese, who had never seen a man from Africa before, were reportedly falling over themselves just to catch a glimpse of Yasuke wherever he went. Obviously, the Japanese were drawn to Yasuke out of sheer curiosity regarding his appearance, but once they actually got to talk to him, they were reportedly delighted by his quiet and respectful nature, along with the fact that he was actually able to communicate in Japanese, which was extremely rare for foreigners visiting Japan at the time, or actually, even nowadays. The same kind of curiosity surrounding Yasuke was present when he and Valeriano finally made it to Kyoto in 1581. Yasuke's arrival in the capital would also turn out to be a fateful event for both him and a certain warlord who just so happened to be in Kyoto at around the same time, Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga had conquered most of Japan at that point and was inching closer and closer to becoming the man who would finally be able to reunite a Japan that was divided into countless autonomous regions controlled by their daimyo, or warlords. Oda Nobunaga was known as a ruthless conqueror, but he was also a very curious person, so it only made sense that he had to see the man from Africa who had become the talk of the town. And with that, Yasuke, accompanied by Valeriano, was allowed to meet one of the most important figures in Japanese history. Nobunaga was immediately fascinated by the man from Mozambique, but actually it wasn't until Yasuke explained to Nobunaga where he came from and why he came to Japan that the warlord finally believed him, that he was indeed a man. Nobunaga was previously convinced that Yasuke must have been either a guardian spirit or a demon. Still, there were doubts in the mind of the Japanese warlord. He didn't believe for a second that Yasuke's skin was actually that dark. It must have been dyed with some sort of ink to make it look that way, he thought. He asked Yasuke to allow his servants to wash his skin in order to prove that he wasn't playing some sort of prank on Nobunaga. Yasuke obliged. Obviously, nothing changed, and Nobunaga was finally convinced that Yasuke was exactly who he claimed to be. And with that, the groundwork for what would be a very close friendship was laid. Actually, if it wasn't for this unique friendship between Yasuke and Nobunaga, we would probably have a lot less information about the man from Africa than we have now. A chronicle of Nobunaga's life, titled Shinsho Koki, offers the most detailed description of what Yasuke really looked like. Quote, "A black bozu from the Christian country has arrived. He appears to be 26 or 27 years old. The blackness of his body is like that of a bull, and he is healthy and of fine physique. Moreover, he has the strength of more than 10 men. The term bozu refers to either a monk or, in this case, a man with a shaved head. Yasuke is more often than not depicted with dreads, which I was honestly kind of sad to hear wasn't true. It looks badass." Another description of Yasuke's appearance comes from the Ietada diary of Matsudaira Ietada, a samurai who fought under Tokugawa Ieyasu, a future shogun and one of Nobunaga's most important allies. The Ietada diary stated the following. Nobunaga-sama was accompanied by a black man who was presented to him by the missionaries, and to whom he gave a stipend. His body was black like ink, and he was 188 centimeters or 6 feet 2 inches tall. His name was said to be Yasuke. There's some interesting information in here. I mean, first of all, Yasuke was massive, an absolute unit, if you will. At 6 foot 2 inches tall, he was sure to tower over pretty much the whole Japanese population, where men at the time had an average height of around 5 foot 2 inches. He was also given money, and according to other sources, even land and a house to live in by Oda Nobunaga. And, well, his name was obviously Yasuke. But actually, where did that name come from? Well, it certainly wasn't his birth name. That one is actually unknown to this day. The Japanese name Yasuke was allegedly given to him by Nobunaga himself, and there's some interesting theories out there as to why the warlord chose this particular name. A common name in Mozambique around that time was Isufo, which might have been changed to Yasufe due to a local dialect change. It's possible that the Japanese simply chose to call him Yasuke just because for them, Yasufe was a bit difficult to pronounce. Alternatively, Yasuke could have been a descendant of the Yao people of North Mozambique. His Japanese name might be nothing more than the word Yao shortened to Ya, accompanied by the Japanese masculine name suffix Suke. Yasuke. Either way, Yasuke certainly made a name for himself in Japan, both literally and figuratively. He became not only one of Oda Nobunaga's most loyal and trusted bodyguards, but also a real friend. I would like to think that Nobunaga was able to get along with and trust Yasuke so quickly because he came from a foreign land. A lot of the people that the warlord surrounded himself with could have benefited greatly from conspiring against him. Yasuke was different. He had no ambitions towards conquering land or becoming a powerful man. He wasn't involved in Japanese politics and was said to be a humble, quiet guy who found great pleasure in sharing experiences from the outside world and practicing his Japanese skills while doing so. It was pretty clear to pretty much everyone who knew Nobunaga that he and the man from Africa shared some kind of special bond. The Portuguese missionary Luís Fruis wrote, "The black man understood a little Japanese, and Nobunaga never tired of talking with him. And because he was strong and could do a few tricks, Nobunaga took great pleasure in protecting him and had him roam around the city of Kyoto with an attendant. Some people in the town thought that Nobunaga might make him his lord." In a way, Fruis' prediction might have come true. Some speculate that Yasuke was not only the first African man to set foot on the Japanese islands, but that he also became the first Westerner to receive the prestigious title of samurai, a title bestowed upon him by Oda Nobunaga. Whether or not he actually received this title is a controversial topic. Even for Japanese-born peasants, the chances of becoming a samurai were close to zero. But Nobunaga had a bit of a track record of making the impossible happen. One of his most trusted allies and one of the so-called three great unifiers of Japan, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, was born as a peasant but was elevated into the status of samurai by Nobunaga after proving himself worthy. Don't get me wrong here, the name Nobunaga represents a myriad of bad character traits, but prejudice did not seem to be one of them. The man simply never really cared much about one's origins or rank. Yasuke even followed Nobunaga into battle occasionally, and was actually with the warlord during one of the most decisive moments in Japanese history, the Honnoji incident of 1582, which spelled the end for Oda Nobunaga. Not even a year after Yasuke had joined him, Nobunaga was betrayed by Mitsuhide, one of his own men, and subsequently attacked at Kyoto's Honnoji temple. As the temple was set ablaze and Nobunaga retreated into a back room to commit seppuku, Yasuke managed to make it out alive. He then teamed up with Nobutada, one of Nobunaga's sons who was about to be the target of Mitsuhide's next attack, and fought valiantly. But yet again, Yasuke found himself on the losing side of the battle and was captured by Mitsuhide and his army, who could have ended his life, then and there. According to the annual report on Japan by Luís Fruis, Yasuke's life was ultimately spared, proven by this quote from Mitsuhide himself. "A black slave is an animal and knows nothing, nor is he Japanese, so do not kill him and place him in a custody at the Cathedral of Padre in India." 5 months after the Honnoji incident, Fruis once again wrote about Yasuke, thanking God that his life was spared. The rest of Yasuke's life is unfortunately a big question mark, as he was never mentioned again in any sort of historical texts or documents. Some people believe that the dark-skinned man taking part in a sumo wrestling match in this artwork from the year 1605 might actually be Yasuke. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is. Information about Yasuke is hard to come across and in many cases unreliable, as is, but the last few pages about his life are unfortunately completely blank. Whatever may or may not have truly happened to him, Yasuke has managed to capture the imagination of countless people despite only appearing in a few texts over a span of only 3 years. Rumor has it that he went back to working for the missionaries and spent the rest of his life in Japan. I personally like to think that Yasuke somehow managed to live a long and healthy life in the land of the rising sun, witnessing both its unification as well as the peaceful Edo period that came as a result. What do you think happened to Yasuke during his later years? Let me know in the comments down below. I also want to thank all of my Patreon supporters listed here, including Busner. And to everyone else who stuck around until the end, thank you so much for watching. Sayonara.